Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sasha Herzig. I'm a fiduciary strategist with KeyBank, and I'm also a board member of the Art Center in Troy, New York. And we're here with the Art Center's Sessions Online programming, where we're speaking with artists. And today we're having a conversation with Sasha Dubodel. So thank you so much for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm an art historian and turned metalsmith, but really I still have one foot in each field. And some people find it a little odd, but it seems like a natural connection to me. I view these things as half of a whole. So I'm originally from Goma, Belarus, which is a country in Eastern Europe, but I've lived in New York for a long time. I've been based in Troy since the summer of 2017, but prior to that, I spent almost 20 years in New York City. I completed my undergraduate work at Union College, so not too far from here in Schenectady, where I studied visual arts and art history. And then afterwards, I attended a PhD program at the Institute of Fine Arts, also for art history, but I left after completing my master's. Post-graduate school, I worked on curatorial teams for exhibitions in the US and in Europe. I owned an art gallery in Tribeca for a few years and eventually came to work as a fine and decorative art specialist at an art auction house in New York City, where over the years, my focus kind of shifted towards Russian pre-revolutionary decorative art, especially the work of Fabergé. And that took me to working on various projects like the Fabergé collection at the Met, Metropolitan Museum, and the Stock Exchange holdings. And I absolutely loved what I was doing, but being a creative person, I found that I really needed an outlet to actually make pieces, not just look at the work of others. And metalsmithing was actually not something that I considered at all until it kind of just fell into my lap. So my husband, at the time, my fiance, who's an extreme DIYer, he decided that he was going to make me my wedding band. So obviously this is something that I had to answer in kind. And I just really fell in love with the process. So soon I started making pieces for friends and then eventually began to seek out instructors throughout the city, just signing up for classes on nights and weekends. Metalsmithing is just such a transformative process.
Tell us a little bit about metalsmithing and sort of what the difference is between the materials that you use.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, you can find like all manner of adornments made from plastic, paper, leather, wire wrap beads. But being a historian, I'm drawn to the more ancient techniques and approaches that metalsmithing allows me to explore. So to me, metalsmithing, and specifically the subsections that I'm involved with, which is goldsmithing and silversmithing, is the process of using flame, pressure, sawing, filing, soldering, and casting to make pieces. And I primarily work with gold and silver, but I will occasionally use bronze or brass too, especially for larger or heavier pieces. And I use just recycled metals. I source them from a company in New Mexico. I try to avoid waste in as much as I can, to the point where I actually save filings and dust generated as I work. These are like by carat separated, like 18 karat, 14 karat. And then I basically smelt them down and reuse them. So I try to be really mindful of those when it comes to materials.
That's great.
But when it comes to gemstones, whenever possible, I really like to see them in person before I actually buy them. And I tend to do so at gem fairs, like usually like trade-only gem fairs. So imagine like a huge conference hall that's just like gem dealers as far as the eye could see. It can get really overwhelming, but if you come in with like a pretty laser focus on what you want, it makes it easier. And for me, I'm like particularly enamored with cabochons and also like amethysts, carnelians, garnets, rock crystals. I have like a set group of stones that I really like to work with. So it really makes it easier for me to actually choose things.
So it sounds like you've really been able to create a connection between art history and your jewelry. Was that the intention, or did it just sort of happen naturally?
Honestly, I don't think I can really separate the two. I mean, I spent so much of my time researching the history of pieces and techniques and styles, works from antiquity and sometimes like more recent past, that it inevitably just like serves as inspiration. So generally speaking, though, I try to create works that evoke a particular like feeling, that bring to mind maybe antique forms without necessarily referring to a specific time in particular. So just like a certain je ne sais quoi.
So when you started your business, did you start it in Troy or did you start it in New York City before you moved up here?
Well, I was studying while I was in New York City, but I only opened up the business once I actually moved here. I moved here in August and launched in September.
So what drew you to Troy, New York? What made you decide to move here and start your business here?
Well, I actually fell in love with Troy, and its incredibly rich history ever before I ever visited here. So sometimes a place just feels like home before you even set foot there. And I just love the incredibly creative community here, the architecture, the proximity to nature, and the easy access to metropolitan areas. You have Boston, New York City, Montreal. You really just can't beat that combination.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you moved to Troy, did you find it hard to get involved in the arts community here, or did you feel really connected immediately?
It happened really organically, actually. Moved to Troy about just a couple of months before the church art studios opened, and pretty immediately made friends with some of the artists there. I got connected and involved with the Scarlet 7 gallery, where I had some pieces, and also gave like a talk on art collecting. And then the art center, of course, itself was also a beacon. Within months of launching my business, I had some pieces available at the artist market there. So it really just kind of snowballed. It was very easy. I feel like Troy has a very rich creative community.
It really does. Troy is a really special community. I think a lot of artists feel really connected. So let's talk a little bit about your company. Where did you get the inspiration for its name?
Well, it actually means dawn in Russian. And I am somebody who tends to be a very early riser. So anywhere between like 4:30 and 6:30, you'll find me out and about. And I tend to be really on my A game super early in the morning, like extremely productive, laser focus. So it just kind of seemed like a nice poetic way to name the company.
So in terms of your business, where do you feel like you spend the majority of your time? Is it creating? Is it selling? Is it inspirational work?
I would love to say that I spend the majority of my time making pieces. But as my studio is both a creative practice and a business, I get to wear many hats. So it's a one-woman show, and I do everything from accounting and marketing, research, the actual making of the pieces, packaging, shipping. So no 2 days are the same, but I would really love to partner with some more galleries, boutiques, and museum shops so that I can shift more of my focus to actually making pieces and working on them, and partially outsource some of the selling efforts.
So I know we've talked a lot about your connection between art history and your jewelry, as well as the inspiration behind your company's name. But what is the inspiration for your jewelry pieces itself? And do you have any that you could share with us?
Absolutely. So it's never just one thing, but I do get a lot of ideas from travels, antique hardware, paintings, jewels unearthed in various archaeological digs, but also the gemstones themselves. So I will often look through my hoard, if you will, of gemstones. And depending on the way the air moves that day, a gem will stand out and be asked to make into a particular piece.
So do you do custom pieces, or do you only do pieces that you sort of come up with and then put out for sale?
I primarily focused on my own collections, so works that are either one of a kind or made in small batches for sale. But if somebody really likes my style and they want me to customize something, I will do that.
So we touched a little bit earlier on metalsmithing, but I don't think we dove all the way in. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what metalsmithing is and why you chose jewelry in that medium versus another craft?
Metalsmithing, specifically gold silversmithing, you're using heat and pressure and cutting tools to actually form an object, as opposed to maybe buying pre-manufactured parts and just putting them together. So you're really transforming like a raw element into an object. But jewelry is one of the world's oldest art forms, and I would argue one of the most intimate too. So people buy pieces for a million reasons, to celebrate an occasion, to mark a time in one's life, to simply make yourself feel better. There's an undeniable emotional connection to jewelry. And it can also become an extension of self. I mean, think of, those rings you never take off, or the necklace that makes you feel like a badass when you put it on. To me, it's truly fascinating that I can take a raw piece of metal and with some flame, solder, hammering, make it into something that is truly treasured by a person and might even become an heirloom. It just feels like a real privilege to be a part of someone's life in that way. And I don't think it's something that I could really do through another creative outlet. I'm sure some people can. I'm just not sure I can.
So what is your process for making jewelry? Do you have any tips or tricks or special tools that you can share with us?
Well, it pretty much always starts with a sketch. It's not uncommon for me to mull over an idea for a month or even a year before actually making a piece, or rather, I'll make many pieces during this time, trying to kind of like flesh out the idea, make models of it, figure out exactly what needs to be adjusted. And in other cases, it happens very quickly where, a bolt of lightning strikes and you just make something. But I find that the pieces that I spend more time on, like more time actually thinking about them, those are the ones that in the end I tend to be a lot more satisfied with. Mm-hmm. In terms of tips and tricks, well, my grandmother used to say, we're not rich enough to buy cheap things. So when it comes to tools, my personal approach is to save up and buy something that is really worthwhile, something of high quality, rather than just go ahead and get something that will do for now. But, quality jewelry tools are really notoriously expensive. So I can definitely understand the temptation. But it ends up being such a saver in the long run when you don't have to replace a piece a year or two later. And as far as favorite special tools go, I have many, but the one that I just got recently that I'm still kind of over the moon over is this GRS microblock. I actually have it right here. This little guy.
Wow.
So it's great because it can hold your piece, as you're working on it. It basically gives you like an extra pair of hands. So these jaws open up, and it comes with like something like 30 or 40 accessories that I could put in here to actually hold pieces. And this thing is really, really, really heavy. So it's not going to budge as you're working on it. And it's just like, it has been a lifesaver.
So can you share with us a bit about the difference between semi-precious and precious stones?
I would love to. This is one of my favorite topics because really there's nothing. So a lot of people think that it has to do with scarcity, but that's just not true at all. There are only 4 gems that are considered precious. So those are rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and diamonds. And, there are hundreds of gemstones aside from them. Diamonds are not at all uncommon, actually, and the perceived scarcity is really artificial. So you have tanzanites and saverites, for instance, savorite garnets, that are much more rare, and they're classified as semi-precious stones. But up until recently, like 1830s or so, amethysts were also listed as precious stones. And you see them in various imperial regalia. And at one point, pearls were also considered precious stones, as were opals. So it's really very arbitrary. And in fact, the US Federal Trade Commission has considered doing away with the term just because it's so misleading. All right, so I'm actually doing the recording from my studio right now, and I'd be happy to give you a look around. It's not
great. I love it.
So behind me over here, this is my main workstation. This is where I make most of my pieces. I don't know how well you can see it. So some of my everyday tools are over here on this grating. And then this is the major forming desk. Various accoutrements. And then I'm currently in the process of overhauling my ventilation system. So things are a little wonky, but this is where I do most of my soldering work, this little metal station. The tiles on the wall are kind of to protect it from fire. Very safe.
Very important.
Some of my research materials are over here. I don't know how wonky I'm being, but I hope you can see it all right.
No, it's great, yeah.
I have a thing for antique furniture, so This is my admin station. And this is basically my space. Currently installing a skylight, still in process, currently just a hole in the wall. But it gets a lot of light. I have basically light access on 3 sides.
Oh, that's really nice.
4 if you count the ceiling, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And as for pieces, I pulled a few for you. These are some of the works from my Modern Antique series, like these rings over here with my favorite gemstones. I may have mentioned that I have a soft spot for stones with unusual inclusions, like this moss agate, which is just, in my mind, lovely. More modern antique pieces. This one is probably a little bit more directly inspired by a specific work than most of the types of works I make. But this, I first saw one of these pieces when I worked at an art auction house. It was an original early 1800s piece, and I just fell in love with it. So I decided to make one for myself.
I love that piece.
And I wish I could show this to you a little bit better, but you could see it on my website. So this is actually a globe where I hand engraved various continents on one side, and then we have a gorgeous amethyst cabochon on the other.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And this right here is from an upcoming series I'm working on that features serpents. So this is a test piece that I'm still playing with, but we'll see how it develops. So at this moment, I'm on maternity leave until later this summer. And so my website is really the best place to get pieces that I currently have available. But most of my clients, you know, they're peppered throughout the States. They tend to be in larger cities, so like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and also throughout Europe and Canada. And I still get really excited when every time I get like to add a new city to my mental list of places where my pieces have gone. But I would really love to establish more of a partnership and a presence here in the local area. So, you know, places ranging from like Hudson to Saratoga. That would be really excellent.
Yeah, this is such an artist-rich community that we live in and the surrounding areas. It really is. I do feel fortunate to live here.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. We will include a link to your website and to your Instagram and to your work so that our audience can take a look. And we look forward to seeing you soon.